Hello, my seedlings. Welcome to the Grove. My name is Celine Whitetail, and thank you so much for answering my call to be with me today. Find a shady spot, a good book, and listen while I tell you about the books I read in August and September, as well as the books that I want to read in October, because I wrote the August part of this script and my September TBR halfway through September, recorded it, and got so busy with work I didn't get to edit it in time, and it just wouldn't make sense to put out a September TBR video at this point. It is almost the end of October. So we're gonna wrap up everything in one big video. Oh boy, looking at my Goodreads list, the beginning of August feels like a lifetime ago at this point. I only read 6 books in August, which is more than July. I tend to like to get 8 to 10 books, so 6 is a little low for me, but 6 is still good. I completed 6 out of the 11 books I set out to read. I read 2 romantasy and 4 contemporary romances with 1 2-star, 1 2.5, 1 3, and 3 4 stars, making this quite a good reading month overall, even though we had no 5 stars. I read books on Kindle, listened to 1 audiobook, read 3 physical books. I got through to July and the Year of the Goober Challenge, knocked out one of my 25 and 2025, and 3 bucks off my physical TBR in just August. So a very productive month for a few of my lists, which we love, which have now all sadly gone away. Looking back on this script, it is a little dated, so let's get right into the books, shall we? We begin the month with Kiss of the Basilisk, formerly Split or Swallow, by Lindsay Straub, which was our pick for March in the Year of the Goober Challenge, fulfilling the prompt republished or new cover, which, as you may or may not know, this book got a new title and cover after it went viral on BookTok and became traditionally published. This is a dark romantasy that follows Temperance, a chicken farmer who is set to join the other girls in the village to try to win the prince's hand in marriage. In this universe, sex is a very important part of their society, and all of the future prospective queens must learn to have great sex from the basilisks who live outside of the village, because great sex leads to more chances at having an heir. Temperance is paired with Caspin, the Serpent King, and she starts to fall for them both. What is a girl to do? I ended up giving this book 2 stars and 5 chilies, and really, oh my god, I could rant about this book all day. I'm going to start off with the good points, the things that made me finish this book, the few things that granted it an additional star. I will, however, say, if you are interested in reading this book, take my review with a grain of salt, and I would suggest going into it blind. I won't necessarily spoil anything major, but I will talk about aspects that aren't clear in the back blurb and what caused me to DNF the book, which you may consider a spoiler, depending on who you are. Now, for the good parts. I really enjoyed both of the guys. Caspin was my favorite character, which should surprise no one. I'm in the firm camp that Caspin did nothing wrong and he's perfect, and I won't be taking any questions. The prince was fine. He has a tragic backstory that makes you feel for him and explained some of his more unsavory behavioral tendencies. The villains feel villainous, and what little plot we got scattered throughout the book was intriguing, and will be the thing along with Caspin that will make me pick up the second in the duology, just to see how it ends. But dear God, I hated Temperance. She is the worst FMC I think I've ever been forced to read. I've had boring FMCs, but she was just frustrating. I walked into this thinking it was going to be a 5-star book. The beginning had me hooked. We had a virgin FMC who's trying to take control of her sexuality in a world that treated her poorly. There was the drama of Caspin knowing he was training the girl he was falling in love with how to have sex with a man who wasn't him. I was loving it. And then we hit the worst thing an author can do in a love triangle. The FMC started cheating on one of her partners. And yes, both guys knew about the other, but there is a scene where the prince comes over to her home and they want to have sex for the first time, and he says the words, he being Caspin, doesn't have to know. Ew. And after floundering in bed, just unable to sleep due to the proximity of him being in the other room, she gets up and goes to him and says, yeah, he doesn't have to know. That is cheating, full stop. And I was willing to let it go if it turned out the author had trigger warnings somewhere, and cheating was one of them. I don't generally read trigger warnings for books since nothing like triggers me per se in a super negative way or, anything like that. But cheating is something I don't enjoy and generally will not read about. And I found out that not only does this book not have any official trigger warnings, at least none that I could find easily, maybe I missed it, but none of the websites that also do lists of trigger warnings, like romance.io, listed cheating as a trigger warning, and I didn't see it in many of the top reviews on Goodreads either. On top of the fact that this book was over 500 pages long, I just ended up skimming to see how it ended. Temperance was just an absolutely toxic FMC who strung along two guys that loved her and refused to choose between the two of them because she felt like she shouldn't have to, and they should both just be happy to have her at all. But the millisecond a single other woman even breathed in the same building as one of these guys, she was being jealous as hell. It's just, I hated her. Hypocrisy is a character trait that will just make me instantly hate you. And after a while, even the sex got boring because it was just the same thing over and over again. And I like super spicy books, don't get me wrong. I had no problem with the spice. It just got boring after the same missionary and over again. There was like one kind of crazy scene, but really, it was all very vanilla, in my opinion. Like, there wasn't a whole lot of kinks being explored other than like some rough sex because he is a monster creature. As I said at the top, I'll read the sequel because I want to know how the plot ends ultimately, but I'm not going to be rushing for it when it drops. I'll wait for it to be on Kindle Unlimited and skim through it because I can't deal with a 700-page book in Temperance's head again. I just can't. On to a vastly better book, in my opinion, of course. I finally read Our Infinite Fates by Laura Stevens. This fulfilled my April prompt for Year of the Goober: read a book from your favorite genre, which is Romantasy. I'm sure everyone knows the premise of this book already, but if you don't, it's a young adult romantasy where Evelyn and Arden are two souls that are continuously born, and Arden is set on killing her by her 18th birthday, and she doesn't know why. We follow them in the current time of sometime between 2022 and 2025, I can't remember, where Evelyn's younger sister is dying of cancer and she needs to survive long enough to give her a bone marrow transplant, which the operation isn't set to occur until after her 18th birthday. We also get snippets of past lives of the couple and how those timelines ended. I gave this book 4 stars and 1 chili. There was one kind of not closed door, but also not very graphic scenes at the end that just kind of culminated everything. I really enjoyed my time with this book. I read it physically with, I believe, the Barnes and Noble special edition. It had pretty gold foiled edges and it was so easy to get through. The book was beautifully written without being too complicated. The romance was gripping and the ending had me crying my eyes out. I enjoyed only getting a chapter of each of the past lives because Evelyn can only remember a few of her past lives clearly. And then the farther back you go, the harder it gets for her to remember. And since that was from her perspective, it made total sense. I know a lot of reviews that I've seen of this, people were a little annoyed and they wanted more. But to me, it made sense to kind of only see one chapter of each of these individual lives. There was only one timeline I wanted to see another chapter of because it felt like it ended on a cliffhanger, and we saw all of the other timelines to conclusions, except for that one. And honestly, I think that one was one of, if not the most interesting of the timelines, so it was a shame we didn't get to see how it ended. My only complaint is that ultimately the plot twist was a little lackluster for me. I had a guess for what could be happening, and it ended up being incorrect, but like, not to say it in a conceited way, but like I thought my idea was better. But it also could have just been one of those things where you spent the entire book speculating what the reason for their continuous reincarnation is, that the answer might have never been satisfying, and I don't think that's her fault. I loved it, and I'm excited to read Silvercloak, her newest adult romantasy series that she's writing under the pen name L.K. Stevens. Also, even though I read this physically, it is available on Kindle Unlimited. I'd highly recommend. Next up was The Pumpkin Spice Cafe by Laurie Gilmore, the first in the Dream Harbor interconnected contemporary romance series. Say that 5 times fast. This fulfilled my May prompt for the Year of the Goober, a 5-star prediction. Spoiler alert, it wasn't, but that's okay. I listened to this on audiobook through Libby, only my second audiobook, and this was a much better experience. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In this cute small-town romance, we followed Jeannie, a new arrival to Dream Harbor who leaves her corporate job after her aunt retires. Not dies. I thought she died for the first, half of the book, but she's alive. And gives her business, the Pumpkin Spice Cafe, to give her a fresh start. She quickly meets Logan, an antisocial farmer who quickly falls for Jeannie after she asks for help with some weird noises happening outside the cafe at night. I rated this 3 stars and 2 chilies. I enjoyed my time with the book. The audiobook was a lovely experience to play while I put on a cozy farm sim and grinded mindlessly. I kind of wish it was dual narrated, but I think cozy romances are great candidates for audiobook selections for me. The romance was the crux of the plot, and it was fine, but nothing that knocked my socks off. My cozy socks stayed securely on. Logan and Jeannie were both very likable and super cute together. This was another book that I've heard people say is too spicy for them, and that's been the main critique I've seen, and I don't know, maybe things like God of Malice and Kiss of the Basilisk have totally ruined my spice scale, but this wasn't that spicy. It had 2 scenes at the end of the book, and I don't recall them being super graphic either. Different strokes, I suppose. The B plot wasn't very strong and was kind of rushed at the end. I can't say more without spoiling, obviously, but those who have read it, I think, would understand how I feel that the resolution to the B plot felt forgettable, so I just didn't care, and I would rather have seen actual punishment for the things that happened to the FMC. She was tormented for no reason, and everyone was like, oh, it's fine. No, it isn't. Anyway, it wasn't a big deal breaker for me. I'm excited to continue the series, and I'd love to put the special editions on my shelf sometime in the near future. It's a cute popcorn read. These next 3 books I read in 3 days while on my first staycation at my roommate's parents' beach house, which was technically because I lost a bet, but hey, sometimes you get rewarded. I started with A World Apart on Kindle Unlimited by Kate Alexandra. This was my June pick for the Year of the Goober with a prompt pick for the cover because I love the 2 different backdrops of the characters. It's very striking, which is ironic because I read this on Kindle Unlimited. This is a new adult contemporary romance following Kea and Jihoon, an intern at a music studio and a K-pop idol respectively. She's a London transplant who moved to LA after her friend broke up with her boyfriend and needed a roommate and got her an intern job at the music studio she works at. The problem is that the music studio somehow doesn't need an intern, so she spends much of her time organizing shelves and doing menial tasks. However, while there, she meets Jihoon, a member of her favorite K-pop group, who's there in LA recording some solo music, who is instantly smitten with her. The book follows their relationship and the hardships of trying to find herself and what she wants. I sadly gave this book 2.5 stars and 2 chilies because I wanted to love it so much more than I did. I love K-dramas, which this book was very obviously inspired by. So the prospect of a K-pop megastar falling instantly head over heels in love with some random girl he meets didn't bother me at all. I just wanted more. There was really no B plot to speak of. They introduced something at the very beginning of the book, and then it was not really brought up until the very end where it got swiftly resolved. The book really surrounded the relationship and how she felt having to be a secret and dealing with a long-distance relationship with a celebrity. It was one of those books where the state of the plot and conflicts were the same on page 100 as they were on page 400. The concept was just bare bones, and it's obviously the author had an idea for the book, but it was the only idea that they had. They had a beginning and an end figured out, but then they had to find a way to fill out the middle, and that's where it fell flat for me. I don't give out half ratings too often, but it felt like a perfect 2.5. It wasn't bad enough to give a 2 like Kiss of the Basilisk, but it wasn't good enough for a 3 like The Pumpkin Spice Cafe. It's about 100 pages too long to be a quick, fun popcorn read. I'm definitely interested in picking up the sequel, however, which may have more conflict involved based on how this book ended, but again, it's not a very high priority. Next up was Love and Other Conspiracies by Mallory Marlowe, which fulfilled the July prompt book with a light source on the cover for the Year of the Goober Challenge. This is a contemporary romance following Haley, who works as a producer at Legally Distinct BuzzFeed, who is in danger of losing her job if she doesn't pitch a new show for the upcoming season. While surfing late-night TV looking for inspiration, she comes across Hayden, who's guest starring on a conspiracy theory talk show. She finds out he has a long-running podcast where he talks about conspiracies and cryptids and pitches him a show where he can go on location and record episodes hunting for cryptids and staying the night in haunted locations. Think The Watcher, essentially. He ends up saying yes, but is a little stiff in front of the camera, but she jumps in as a skeptic lens and they bounce off of each other well enough that her bosses convince her to become his co-host. Sparks fly after a few stints of haunted sleepovers. I gave this 4 stars and 2 chilies. This was just a super delightful, fun weekend read. You can just turn your brain off, enjoy the banter and the sweet moments, which I very much did. Hayden is a wonderfully sweet MMC who makes me think that, yes, I do like just a good, sweet, caring man sometimes. It doesn't all have to be serial killers and shadow daddies. And Haley was a great FMC with enough baggage to keep things interesting but not be too annoying. There was no real third act breakup and no communication. Well, there was communication. It was the opposite. There was no miscommunication. There was a strong B-plot that kept me engaged, and it was just an overall fun time. No notes. We rounded off the trip with I Hope This Doesn't Find You by Anne Liang, which I technically read on September 1st, but it was on my it's October now. It was on my August TBR, and I was returning from my staycation, so it was really just August 32nd for me. I read this book physically in the car ride home, and I will say, I don't know if it was my copy, but the book felt super crinkly, like the pages were water damaged, even though I'm pretty sure that they weren't. Not a good or a bad thing, just something I noted. This is a young adult contemporary romance about Sadie, a high school senior who is a people pleaser and hates confrontation but has a lot of internalized anger. So instead of confronting, like, say, the girl who borrows her notes and uses them to seal her science fair project, she writes her an email telling her how she feels and then keeps them in her draft box. However, one day, 8 years worth of her emails get sent to everyone in the school, and suddenly everyone knows exactly what she thinks of them, including her top rival, Julius, whom a lot of her more I want to choke you to death emails are about. They are forced to work together on multiple school projects because of the contents of these emails, and things start to change. I gave this book 4 stars and 1 bell pepper, our first and only book with no spice this month, and I still enjoy it a lot. See, it can happen. This was another super fun read that really dived into the pressure we put on ourselves as teenagers to be perfect students, perfect friends, perfect children, our whole lives always being about our future and never enough about the present. The romance is a slow burn as Sadie comes to terms with her attraction to Julius, and him being a dumb high school boy who can't just tell her he likes her, but in an endearing way. My biggest critique is that I felt it kind of strange that the FMC never really tried to discover how her emails got sent in the first place. It crosses her mind for a moment at the beginning, but then she just kind of forgets about it until she discovers the reason at the end of the book. Which, to be honest, how it happened isn't the point, and it's more about the lessons learned because of it happening. It just seemed a little out of character to not care to find out how it happened at all. There was a lot of depth to both characters, and this was a story that hit home to me as a pathological people pleaser and a perfectionist girly always trying to please her parents in high school. I enjoyed myself a lot and would absolutely recommend this book. And that wraps up the 6 books I read in August. Overall, a good reading month with a lot of very fun, chill reads. I think my favorite book this month would be Love and Other Conspiracies. I did like Our Infinite Fates a lot, but I think that Love and Other Conspiracies was just a really fun, chill read. Now we move on to the books I read in September. I had 15 books on my September TBR because if I couldn't read 11 books, I could definitely read 15 books, right? Well, I got close. I finished 10 books in September total and finished my class list for the Magical Readathon and a few NetGalley arcs. The 5 books I had left are being thrown into the TBR void as I have lofty goals for October. And as of writing on the 4th of October, I am already behind, and I'm recording on the 24th of October, so I got even more behind. Welcome to my content creation cycle. I don't have room on my TBR for them, sadly, so The Poisoner, No for an Answer, and Julia Chan is Dead will have to be picked up another time. September brought the hugely anticipated continuation of my first year at the Aurelium Academy and the fall semester of the Magical Readathon 2025. For the uninitiated, every April and September, Book Roast hosts the Magical Readathon, which has the theme of taking classes at a magical school. You choose one of 4 guilds to join and a specialization to study, which will give you your classes, which are your prompts for the month. In April, I joined the House of the Arcane and specialized as a mind mender. And going into your second semester of the year, things get a little bit more complicated. Each class has 3 designations: ordinary, qualified, and distinguished. And depending on what your syllabus requires, you may have up to 3 books to read before clearing the class. This semester for Mind Mender, I had 6 books in total to finish across 3 classes, and I completed them all. For the Magical Readathon, I had 3 classes to take. The first was Spells and Incantations, which I had to get an O distinction in, which means only 1 book to complete. Our prompt was Charm, Luck, roll a d6, and you must read a book within that page bracket. I rolled a 2, so I had to read a book between 200 and 299 pages, and I chose Audited by the Anubis by Wendy Guff, which is 291 pages physically. I came across this book from Goodreads recommendations, and it was so silly I just had to add it to my TBR. And one of my viewers, Token Shadow, bought the physical copy from me. The cover was so eye-catching, and I couldn't wait to read it. We follow Fern and Anu, a cafe owner and a tax auditor who come together after it comes to light that Fern hasn't filed her taxes in 2 years, which is news to her since her mother handles her taxes. I gave this 4 stars. I listened to this on audiobook through Audible and had just a wonderful time. It was dual narrated and both of the actors were super great, and this was just a smutty good time with a surprisingly good B-plot. Not that it's surprising that the B-plot was good, but when going into a fun monster smut book, I don't hold it against it if it's not a good B-plot, but we got it. There was a tiny plot thread at the end that made me roll my eyes a bit, which is what brought this down to a 4, and I can't really explain further without kind of spoiling it, but I'm kind of learning about myself that there is a very common trope that maybe I don't like that much. But it's not enough to deter ultimately. If it does have this, I'm just like, ugh, really? I've been having a blast with easy romance books on audiobook while playing cozy games like Supermarket Simulator or recently The Ale and Tale Tavern. Not much to say on this book. It was a fun time and I added her other books to my TBR. There's a semi-plot hook at the end, which I thought was leading into the next book and I thought I knew the characters. But while adding the other books to my TBR, I discovered that the 2 characters that I thought were going to be the main characters of the next book aren't going to be revisited as the main characters until book 7, which is crazy. I also gave this book 3 chilies because even though this was a monster smut romance, nothing overly crazy happened spice-wise, other than some nodding, which is to be expected with a dog-like MMC. Next class to complete was Psionics and Divination, which I had to become distinguished in, so that means all 3 prompts had to be completed to pass. First prompt was Premonition Prep, genre spin. So I put all my favorite genres on a picker wheel and we landed on historical romance, which is, on paper, my least favorite romance subgenre. But I did have several pretty fun titles to choose from, and I ended up going with Puck and Prejudice by Leah Riley. Elizabeth Woodash just wants to live in peace to do with her life what she chooses. But in Regency-era England, that isn't really an option, unless she becomes a widow. Tucker Taylor is a modern-era hockey player that crashes into a pond after swerving to miss hitting a child and wakes up in the same pond in 1812, right in front of Lizzie. They come up with a plan. They'll get married so she can help him find a way back home, and when he returns to his time, she'll be a widow and able to live the free life she always wanted. What they didn't plan on is falling in love. I gave this book 4 stars and 2 chilies. This was another really fun romance book. I loved Lizzie and Tucker's romance arc and was waiting to see what would happen at the end. If he would choose to stay, if perhaps she would find a way to go back with him, or if it would somehow end up without a happy ending. I knocked a star off because I'll admit I was a little disappointed with the ending. It felt like a non-choice instead, which I can't go into without spoiling why. But we got Jane Austen as a side character. This book made me laugh several times. The main character literally dropped Pride and Prejudice. And that is the inspiration in this universe for how she came up with the name for that book. The book made me laugh several times, and the spice was spicy. I feel like even with dual POVs, at least of the romances I've read, we never get male masturbation scenes, which I think is interesting, especially with how much yearning can happen in these books, but we did get one here. It was a fun time. Recommended. I'm super interested to see how this interconnected series will continue. Will they all have a genre twist, or will the next one be a more traditional sports romance? Because it's following the hockey players on the team. Prompt number 2 for qualified was Future Sight, book with a TV or movie adaptation. And I only realized later that there were a lot of different things I could have chosen for this, including the Sookie Stackhouse novels that I've been wanting to read, but I ended up going with Wild Love by Elsie Silver, which was just picked up for an Amazon Prime series, which is in development currently. Wild Love is a small-town billionaire-esque romance following Ford Grant, the son of a rock star who became a billionaire developing Gemini, a music app, which I think is this universe's Spotify, who is renovating a barn in his hometown to turn into a remote recording studio. Think of like the Long Pond Studios that Taylor Swift recorded Folklore in. Rosie is Ford's best friend's little sister who's running from the big city after she's fired from her job. Ford has been in love with Rosie basically their entire lives, and they have to navigate their complex relationship while Ford deals with an unexpected complication at his front door. I've wanted to read Elsie Silver since I discovered BookTube. She's a household name, and everyone has read at least one of her series. I went into this completely blind, and I'm glad that I did, because I might have been chased away by the single dad trope, as I generally don't care for children being involved in romance books as a child-averse girly myself. But I gave this book 5 stars. Honestly, if I did a 6-star rating, it would be a 6-star. And it was absolutely my favorite book of September by a country mile. I love a pining man, and Ford has been in love with Rosie for 10 years. He saved the key to the diary she threw away and wore it around his neck for 10 years. Whenever she needed him, he came running. He was just such a perfect book boyfriend. The type of guy who ruins real men for women like me because he's so unrealistic for a person, but perfect for a book boyfriend. I loved them so much. She's a brat, he's a brat tamer, and it made me go buy all 4 of the why do I say that? All 4 of the Rose Hill series books for the Mountain Spines and instantly add everything she's ever written to my TBR. It genuinely was a perfect book, no notes. I also listened to this on audio and the narrators were amazing. Our last prompt to give us distinguish was dream interpretation. Read a book that fits the theme of a recent dream. Now, this prompt was a bit tricky since I generally don't remember my dreams, and I don't dream a whole lot. If I dream, they tend to be a nightmare adjacent. Most of the time they're anxiety-based dreams. So I decided to look up a list of books with anxiety representation, and on my TBR already was Emergency Contact by Mary H.K. Choi. This book follows Penny, a girl who is about to start college away from home, and Sam, who is her doormate's uncle, even though they're very close in age, and runs a local coffee shop. They become friends after she comes across him having a panic attack in the park, and they decide to keep in contact solely through texting, and the book follows how that relationship grows. I gave this book 2 stars because unfortunately I didn't like it much at all, which is not the author's fault. It wasn't a bad book. It was more of a contemporary fiction than a romance book. It was written in that contemporary fiction way where all the characters think in similes and snarky metaphors that really don't add anything, and only there to make the character seem quirky. He has a face like a weak handshake was a descriptor that I will never forget, as it literally gave me no help in picturing what this character looked like. I just don't like contemporary fiction most of the time. And the romance was fine, but I just couldn't really get myself to care much about anyone because everyone was just annoying to be in the head of. I might like more contemporary fiction if it's not romance because I'm expecting more romance than book plot, if that makes sense. I don't know. But I've tried a few contemporary romances and contemporary fictions in general, and I haven't really liked any of them. So maybe I'm just not a contemporary girly. And our final class was restoration, which we had to become qualified in, so we had to finish 2 books. Prompt number 1 was Unbroken Focus Tincture, read a book with a single POV, and I chose The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. So many romance books have dual POV, but romantasies tend to have a single POV a lot of the time. But I really wanted to read a sequel, but everything I have in my series list is actually a dual POV. So I went to Reddit for some romantasy recommendations, and this book was recommended multiple times. I added this to my TBR when Cozy with Katie raved about it in one of her videos, and I didn't really know anything about it going in, other than it involved vampires, and I did want to go in blind for the fun of it. I ended up giving this book 3 stars and 2 chilies, as this disappointed me greatly. We follow Aurea, who is the adopted daughter of the vampire king Vincent, plucked from the wreckage of a human village at a young age, and we watch as she competes in the Kajari, a deadly competition where the winner is given a wish by the goddess of night. There she teams up with Rain, who is a vampire and a fellow contestant, with the idea to keep each other alive until the end of the trial where they will have to fight each other. And I'll be honest, Rain killed the first 75% of the book for me. I will preface this with it has absolutely nothing to do with Carissa's writing, or really even Rain himself in all honesty. I grew up in the boom of Twilight and all of the vampire stuff that came after it. Although I've never read Twilight or saw the movies, I was a brat teenager who believed she was too good for Twilight as a Harry Potter girly. And 15 years later, I'm still burnt out and kind of jaded from the good vampire archetype. The vampire that doesn't drink human blood or kill humans. I find them really boring, and it really rips the core of the lore of the vampire for me. And Rain is a neutered vampire. He doesn't drink or harm humans. And Aurea's whole thing is that vampires can't control their bloodlust, and she's injured constantly in this story. And to my recollection, he isn't even tempted by her even a little bit. Also, I'll be honest, I was listening to the audiobook, which, side note, Amanda Lee Cobb did a fantastic job. And I nodded off for a bit and woke up having missed a pivotal plot point because I fell asleep with them hating each other and woke up to her liking him now. And I was like, what the hell happened? But I had no interest to rewind and I just let it keep going. It picked up for me at the end and I enjoyed the ending a lot, but I'm not rushing to continue the series. I probably will just because I want to know how it ends. But, it's on the bottom of my pile of sequels of the mass amount of series that I need to finish. Which again, this is an absolutely personal thing. I just wanted a more ruthless and darker MMC vampire for my first modern vampire romance. It has nothing to do with Carissa or her writing style or the quality of the book. The plot was really fun. I did enjoy it. It was just that Rain as a character didn't interest me at all. Which, in a romantasy, if one half of the couple doesn't interest you, it really takes a lot of the book out. Okay, now that I'm trying to stop the pitchforks, our last prompt was Continental Remedies. Get 5 random places and read a book that takes place in one of those places. I said places a lot there. So this prompt was really hard because I got a lot of really small island countries, but I did get a country in the Caribbean, so I went with a book that takes place in the general region, and that was Crash Landing by Annie McQuaid. This is a second chance romance between Piper and Wyatt, who are traveling to a wedding and wind up on the same charter plane that crashes on a deserted island in the Caribbean, and they have to survive together until they can get rescued. I rated this book 4 stars and 2 chilies, but honestly, I might bump it down to a 3 now that I'm looking back on it. I have a tendency to rate, I've noticed, audiobooks quite highly. And I gave a lot of books 5 stars and then bumped them down to 4 stars after giving them a little bit of thought. And I think I might bump this one back down again. I think I originally gave it a 5 star, but I think I'm actually going to bump it down to a total 3 star, which is unfortunate because I really, really loved it. But there was just the ending. Okay, before I get ahead of myself. I felt instantly attached to Wyatt and Piper as a couple, and my heart broke for their circumstances. This was my first second chance romance, and again, that's a trope I wasn't sure I was going to enjoy because I really enjoy the falling in love portion of a romance book and finding out how they come together. But this was done really well, in my opinion. They were childhood sweethearts that were torn apart, and it didn't leave you going, yeah, the reason you broke up was valid and you should stay apart. My main critique was there wasn't a whole lot of hate from the FMC towards the MMC, like she kept stating in the very first chapters. He broke her heart as a teenager, and she really didn't want to see him, didn't know he was coming to the wedding, got super upset when she found out that he was going to the wedding. They end up getting on a charter plane together that he's flying, and she's upset about it. And she keeps talking about, how she's never going to speak to him. She just needs to get this over with. But they just instantly click. And even though that was really wonderful, and it might have actually been more infuriating if they were at each other's throats in this survival situation, it just kind of made her look a little inconsistent. The third act breakup was very annoying because they obviously fit so well together. The entire book really had no form of conflict. That it was one of those issues of things are going too well, let's make something to break them up for the tension at the end. And that never really works for me. And I just kind of, the ending, the third act breakup was so long. It felt like it was the last 15% of the book. And it just kind of dragged as the book essentially stopped being interesting once they, spoiler alert, got off the island. I feel like that's not a spoiler. It's a fluffy romance book. They're not going to have the main characters starve to death or die on this deserted island in the middle of the Caribbean. Once they got off of the island and separated, there was still 15-20% of the book left, and I was like, maybe not that much, maybe 10 to 15%. But it felt like it dragged on forever. And I'm kind of remembering that because for me, the ending is so important for my rating of a book. I really need it to be good or it can sour the entire book for me. And although I really, really, really enjoyed the first 80%, 85%, that last 10 really just ruined it, in my opinion. I would still highly recommend it. I think it's a super fun summer read. And it is this author's debut novel. So obviously it only goes up, right? So I'm super excited. I'm going to be picking up more of her work. So don't let my negativity color how good this book was. I think it's like a 3.5. Like I said, it was mostly just the ending and a little bit of the inconsistency at the beginning. But the middle, like the core chunk of the book, super good. I had a great time and I loved the characters. So we have finished the Magical Readathon for 2025. I read 3 other books in September and they all came from NetGalley. I joined NetGalley at the end of August and was lucky enough to be accepted for a few books. I read a few that are archiving in September. For people who don't know how NetGalley works, it's a website where authors and publishers offer advanced reader copies or advanced listeners copies of upcoming releases in exchange for reviews on public websites like Goodreads and Amazon or the reader's social media pages. The books will archive on a certain date, which just means they will no longer be available to download from the NetGalley website, and that usually happens soon after the book's official release date. I had 2 books from NetGalley that archived in September. The Baby Dragon Bakery by Amna Qureshi, which is the sequel to The Baby Dragon Cafe, which I hadn't read yet, but had on my TBR, and Roll for Romance by Lenora Woods. I read The Baby Dragon Cafe in preparation for the Baby Dragon Bakery. This is a cozy fantasy romance series about small town romances in a world where people own dragons. The first book follows Saphira, the owner of the Baby Dragon Cafe, the only business in town that allows baby dragons inside their establishments because they're so destructive, and Aiden, the town's gardener and son of one of the most prestigious dragon rider families, who is gifted a newly hatched dragon by their deceased brother, who will just not listen to him. Sparky takes a liking to Saphira, and Aiden hires her to train Sparky so she can buy a new espresso machine after a baby dragon melts it in the opener. The sequel, The Baby Dragon Bakery, follows Saphira's best friend and aspiring veterinarian, Lavinia, and her best friend, Luke, who makes pastries for the Baby Dragon Cafe, and their love story as they struggle with liking each other, but both being too nervous to tell the other. I gave the Baby Dragon Cafe 3 stars and 1 chili. I had a lot of fun listening to this. It was another cozy dual narrated romance that I've been in love with recently. Can I say that enough? And this was a very serviceable one. Saphira and Aiden were a super cute, fun couple, and I enjoyed their romance a lot. I didn't rate it higher for 2 big reasons. The first being is that the author put in a subplot of a class divide, and it only is brought up when it was convenient to the plot. Everyone in town was incredibly nice to Saphira, but when the author needed her to pull away, she would overhear something classist because of her family's past with dragons. I was excited at the beginning when a secret between the 2 characters was brought up. The MMC just talked to her about it, and no drama ensued. I was like, oh my gosh, a couple who communicates and doesn't get mad about stuff neither had control over. I love this. And then the FMC just went off at the end to do a 3rd act drama angle. Not a breakup necessarily, but the equivalent of miscommunication. And it was rushed through just to kind of wrap up the book, and it felt just kind of clunky. And the other was, I wanted some spice. I was ready to see a spicy scene between these 2 based on the yearning we got, but it was just a paragraph and mostly closed doors, and I was like, oh, that's it after all that? Again, books do not need spice, but I feel like this book would have benefited from it. With all that said, I did enjoy it and immediately went into book 2. The Baby Dragon Bakery follows Saphira's BFF Lavinia, who is finishing up vet school, and her childhood best friend Luke, who is a baker who's losing his passion. I DNF'd this book at the 50% mark, and if you don't want spoilers as to why, skip the timestamps below. I always do chapters for video, so I'll just give you a second to do that now. Obviously, I didn't read the end of the book, so I won't be spoiling anything major plot related, but there's your warning anyway. Okay. I DNF'd this book because we had a cheating trope. Again. The book begins at Saphira and Aiden's engagement party, or wedding. I forget which at this point. But Lavinia goes to kiss Luke, but miscommunication forces them both to think the other isn't interested, even though they're both so in love with each other. Which is already an infuriating concept, but fine, it makes sense. I've definitely had crushes on friends, and been unwilling to say anything because you don't want to ruin the friendship, and they've been friends for a really long time. It's understandable. But Lavinia is just an annoying person who has decided her entire life needs to follow her parents' magical love romance story. And she's gonna die alone if she doesn't find her match by the winter where she turns 24, because that's when her parents met. It's just a really flimsy and immature premise, and it doesn't make any sense. But I was willing to trudge through the audio until she starts dating a barista at the cafe who's a super nice guy who does nothing wrong to her that I read to. But when he has to cancel a date due to him being busy with his teacher assistant job, she starts to spiral and wants to find out why he's blowing her off. When she wonders if she's a bad kisser, Luke suggests that they kiss so he can tell her if she's a bad kisser. And she agrees to this. And he does like the slowest, most sensual kiss, starting by kissing her forehead and her cheeks, and then they share a kiss and then he fucking runs away. I put the book down immediately at that point. Maybe I'm just sensitive, but that's cheating to me because this poor man is just being used because these two children won't have an adult conversation about their feelings. Fuck Luke for suggesting Lavinia cheat on her boyfriend. Fuck Lavinia for going through with it. And fuck Luke again for helping Lavinia cheat and then fucking running away so there isn't even a conversation about it. Now, I did enjoy the first book, and a writer putting cheating in a book won't make me swear off an author forever, but I will be honest. The third book is going to involve an enemies/rivals to lovers couple we've been teased with through the book, and I'm very interested in that couple, so I'm willing to give it another go, but the Baby Dragon Bakery was not for me. Now, there might be a reason, or we might come to find out later that the barista was actually cheating on her, or like being super shady or whatever, but even if that's the case, they didn't know that at the time, so it doesn't excuse their behavior. So, just straight DNF. I moved on. The last book I read in September was Roll for Romance by Lenora Woods, which follows Sadie and Noah, who both are transplants to Texas, who join Sadie's cousin's new D&D game. They fall in love in and out of the game, but Sadie has plans to return to New York to her marketing job, and Noah has never stuck around in one place for very long. I ended up giving this book 2 stars and 2 chilies because I, again, say it with me, wanted to like this book more than I did. I had this as a 5-star prediction book, so I went in with high expectations, which might be my fault. The things I didn't like were 2 very big ones: the way the book was structured and Noah as a character. The book jumps between the real-life relationships and lives of Noah and Sadie and their D&D characters in the campaign they're in. It is a very interesting and unique concept, but it just didn't work for me. I ended up not caring about the D&D plotline at all, and just was waiting for it to be over so we could get back to the real-life timeline, which was much more interesting. It was sort of like hearing someone else tell you about their D&D game that they were just in. You're listening and maybe even a little interested, but you'll just never be as engaged as if you were playing in the game yourself. And Noah was, for me, just kind of a nothing character. We never got much backstory for him, and his whole conflict was that he was a wanderer who never settled down, but we never saw that in action. The FMC is so important in a romance for me. You want to fall in love with him right alongside the FMC. And I genuinely think Noah could have been removed from the book and nothing would have changed other than it being significantly shorter. Sadie was a great character, and her personal growth trying to decide between her happiness and turning her art into a potential career, or going back to New York City when a dream job opportunity presents itself, was very compelling. She spends the book trying to figure out what she wants to do with her life, and that was fun to watch. But the rest of it just wasn't, unfortunately. Okay, and now we move in to our October TBR that I am now presenting you on October 24th. I have some work to do. All right, so where do I start this? Originally going into October, I had a massive 20-book TBR, which consisted of backlists from some yearly challenges I was a part of that I didn't get to start until April, because that's when I discovered booktubers and their content. I had some Neck Alley arcs that needed to be finished, and after having only read less than 10% of my first book on the list by the end of the first week, I decided to do something very crazy for me. I've been experiencing a lot of minor dissatisfaction with things in my life recently, especially when it comes to my hobbies. Nothing is calling to me. I don't want to play any games, I'm less satisfied with books, and just everything feels very muted to me right now. I was recently clinically diagnosed with ADHD, and I'm currently in the works of finding a medication that works for me, and my work has kind of tanked, which has caused all other aspects of my life to follow in some ways. All that being said, it's now 3 weeks later from me writing this script, and I am now properly medicated on a good regimen of Adderall, and my work is slowly progressing, and I might finally get to read again soon. And all of that to say, I also picked a lot of these books up back in April when I didn't really know what I wanted to be reading. I didn't know what I liked, what I didn't like, and I'm pushing myself to rush through these monthly picks when I feel like it would be better if these prompts were filled at the month they were going to be read. So, as someone who hates to give up on things, it is with a heavy heart that I chose to get rid of the Year of the Goober and the Year in Aldia challenges this year, as well as my 25 and 2025. There will always be next year to start fresh in January with both of these challenges, as well as a potential 26 in 2026. And I think overall, I will feel happier if I can start with everyone else instead of constantly playing catch up and not having a huge amount of books on my backlist that I feel like I'm failing at if I don't read. So that was a very long-winded way to say I scrapped my October TBR entirely and was left with, well, what do I do instead? As you can probably tell just by looking at me, I love autumn. And I did have an idea for a seasonal TBR, so I thought to myself, why don't I try mood reading this month? Now, I will say, as a type A girly, I can't just not have no plans for what I want to read at all. So I won't be doing traditional, or what I think is traditional mood reading, which I imagine for mood readers is that you finish a book and you pick up a new one based on what you're feeling at that exact moment. Instead, I had some vibes I knew I wanted to hit for October, and that's what helped me pick the books I hope to read this month. For October, I knew I wanted to read a few things. I wanted to read some popular dark romances that have been on my radar for a long while. I wanted a cozy fall contemporary romance. I wanted a horror book, preferably one that was akin to a horror or slasher movie. I wanted at least one paranormal romance, and I wanted a smutty dark novella of some kind. I also knew I wanted around 8 books on the list, as that's a nice number I generally can hit each month without being overwhelmed. Now, you might notice that there are 10 books on this list. 2 of them are novellas. They basically don't count as books, but they do when I'm counting how many books I've read. That makes sense, right? A book I knew I wanted to read immediately was Haunting Adeline by H.D. Carlton. I have seen so many dark romance enjoyer booktubers have this as a 5-star read, and yet I somehow knew absolutely nothing about it. The blurb gives no indication what the book is about other than it is some sort of fantasy element and he's a stalker. That's all I know. And it's all I really want to know. I want to read all of the greats everyone talks about and has on their shelves, so Haunting Adeline is on the list. Another book that I have had my eye on for a long while is Her Soul to Take by Harley Laroux. I was gifted the deluxe edition by one of my viewers, Cloud Factory. Thank you so much. And have just been waiting for an opportunity to read it. Again, this is a book I don't know much about as the blurb is vague, but I do know it's a dark paranormal romance and she summons a demon, I think? October is perfect for dark paranormal romance, so getting the 2 of the most well-known ones out of the way that I've been wanting to read just seems logical, doesn't it? Last of our popular dark paranormal and or fantasy romances, I have Nocticadia. I knew I wanted to add something by Carrie Lake on my October TBR because she's a heavy hitter in the dark romance genre, and so many of her books by the passages have interested me. I struggled with whether to put Nocticadia or Anathema on my list, but decided to go with Nocticadia because it is her most known work, going strictly off of the number of Goodreads ratings, and it is a standalone, whereas Anathema, I'm pretty sure, got a sequel. I think that came out this month, actually. I love me a series, and I already have so many series I'm in the middle of, so I just go with a standalone here. Nocticadia is a dark academia romance between a girl who is accepted to an academy who is looking for a cure to the illness that killed her mother and her pathologist professor. I love teacher-student romances, and I'm excited to finally read a powerhouse in Carrie Lake. I also knew that I wanted some more fluffy romances to break up the darkness, and I knew instantly what one of those books would be. A Pack for Autumn by Amelia Emerson. This is a Why Choose Omegaverse novel, a part of their Cozyverse series, which follows a pack for each of the 4 seasons alongside another author for winter and summer, Eliana Lee. A Pack for Autumn follows Olive, who moves to Starlight Grove as the new lighthouse keeper to get a fresh start and meets 3 alphas who are contractors hired to fix up the lighthouse when it's given a grant. I've never read a Why Choose or an Omegaverse book, so I'm excited to take these off my reading list, and this just seems like such a cute book to do it. I also knew I wanted a fall contemporary romance, but this one was much more up in the air. I didn't have a specific title in mind, so I went to my fall reads tag and chose the highest rated book on my list, which is If It Makes You Happy by Julie Olivia. The cover screams fall. This is a friends to lovers small town romance following our FMC who runs an inn in town, and her new neighbor is a baker and hot single dad. However, she's going to take a job in Seattle in a few months and can't afford to get into a relationship with Cliff. I did enjoy The Single Dad and Wild Love, so it'll be fun to see if I enjoyed here as well. This has a 4.26 with nearly 20k ratings, and although I don't tend to put any thought into a book's Goodreads ratings, when choosing a book, it can be helpful if you're not sure what to read. I had a couple of paranormal romances that I added for different reasons. The first is Love at First Fright by Nadia Alfasi, which I was lucky enough to get an arc on NetGalley last month. I'll be honest, up until writing the script, I thought this was a vampire romance because for some reason, the cover made me think he was in the shadows and she was in the light, and that made him a vampire. No, turns out not. We follow Rosemary, who is a horror novelist who can see ghosts, who is having her horror book turned into a movie. However, she doesn't like the actor that the studio has picked, Ellis, who is cast as the male lead for reasons we will learn. Mostly it seems to be that he is a action movie star, and she doesn't think that he will do well in a nuanced period drama horror movie. On top of that, the movie is being filmed in a haunted mansion, which will cause shenanigans. Happy to tick another NetGalley book off the list, and it's a good Halloween time book. The second is a newly released book by a well-known author, Soul Searching by Lila Sage. Lila Sage is known for her Rebel Blue Ranch series, which she just concluded, which are cowboy romances, and this is a paranormal small-town romance about a heroine that can see ghosts who takes up the spare room of a carpenter who doesn't know his shop is haunted. This has been on a lot of people's TBR, so I'm excited to start a brand new series from its start instead of one that already has 4 or more books. And Lila Sage is a well-received romance author. Lastly, I selected Hot for Slayer by Allie Hazelwood. Originally, I went back and forth with myself on whether I wanted to keep Bride on my list, especially since its interconnected sequel Mate is being released this month, but ultimately, I decided to shelve it for now as I pre-ordered the special editions of the pair from Illumicrate, so I'll read them both together at some point down the line. And this is supposed to be mood reading, so if I wasn't chomping at the bit to read it, it was probably a sign to set it aside for now and pick it up later. Hot for Slayer is a novella that was released alongside 5 other novellas by big romance authors like Ruby Dixon and Katie Roberts as part of Amazon's Scared Sexy series. All of the books and their corresponding audiobooks are available with a Kindle Unlimited subscription, and all of them are around an hour to 2 hours long to listen to. I only have Hot for Slayer on my list because I have really wanted to read Allie Hazelwood, and this is a nice small book to read, but I may end up reading the others since they're so short and sweet. I don't know much about Hot for Slayer other than it's a vampire slayer ex-vampire romance, and I think the slayer... In my notes, it says I think the Slayer FMC has amnesia, but I have actually read this book, and the male character is the Slayer, and the female is the vampire, and the male gets amnesia. And they fall in love because he doesn't remember them or that it's his job to kill her. Sounds great. There are so many paranormal romances I wish I could put on this list, but I had to limit myself to 8 books, or else I was going to stress myself out. There's always next year. There were 2 more specific book types I wanted on the list, and the first was a horror book that was similar to a slasher or horror movie. And there were a couple that came to mind, but I decided to go with Clown in a Cornfield by Adam Cesar? Gonna go with Cesar. Kesser. No, it's probably Cesar. I don't know. This follows a town that is split in half after a party ends in the death of a girl, and a fire shuts down the only factory in town, leaving many of the adults jobless and pissed at the kids who ruined everything. until a clown starts murdering people. Yeah, I don't know, but I heard this is going to be turned into a movie, which I'd love to watch on Halloween, and I've heard good things about this book. And lastly, I wanted a dark, smutty novella, as I have several on my list, and I settled on Burn for Jack by Aidan Pierce, which is part of the interconnected series Holiday Horrors, with other such titles as Bleed for Cupid and Pray for Rabbit. Going into this blind, other than I know it's paranormal and Halloween related. That's all I really needed to know. And those are the 8-ish books on my October hopefuls list for my first month mood reading. Again, a little bit of a spoiler. It is October 24th. I have not been able to read anything basically because my job has just been so packed, but I intend to do my October reading wrap up on the 2nd, 2 weeks from now, essentially. Next week is going to be my November TBR and then my October wrap up. So I will technically be reading some books in November, but I'm going to try to finish as many of these books as I can. It was very fun to put together, not having to find things to fit strict prompts, but just a general vibe I wanted to hit. I already have some potential ideas for either a best hits theme, or I'm honestly probably going to go with my NetGalley TBR for November and have it be NetGalley November. I've put together a long list of series and authors and books that I really, really want to read in 2026. So that will be coming towards the end of the year. But before I get in too deep, where I've pre-planned months in advance again, let's get through October 1st and see how it goes. If you want to know how this works out for me, be sure to subscribe to the channel and click that bell to be notified when I put out my October reading wrap-up, which I intend to have released on the 7th of October. Next week, we're going to talk about my November TBR, which, like I said, should be filled with a lot of NetGalley and maybe like a big release that I didn't get to yet this year. We'll see. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, put a knife emoji for pumpkin carving, of course. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. Stay safe, stay comfy, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye.